The call, apply, and bind methods are used for function borrowing in JavaScript. It means using them we can use the method of one object on a different object without having to make a copy of that method and maintain it in two different places. Let's understand it with an example. So what we have here is a function called print name that have two parameters, city and country, and an object named as my name with properties first name and last name. So what we want to achieve here, we want to use this print name function to print these first name and last name properties of this my name object. So let's see how we can do that using the call method. So first we have to type the name of the function that we want to borrow. Print name dot. Now every function in JavaScript has access to this call method. The first argument that it takes is the context or the reference to the this keyword. Now what does that mean? It means what the this keyword inside this print name function should point out to. So in our case we want this keyword to point out to this my name object. So the first argument will be my name object. And if the function print name is accepting any arguments, then we can pass those arguments like this. Now if we save this and run, we see we get the output. Now let's move to the polyfill part, how we can implement our own call method to achieve the same thing. Every function in JavaScript has access to this call method. Similarly, every function should also have access to our polyfill that we are creating. So for that, we need to put our polyfill inside the function prototype like this function dot prototype, and we can give any name to a polyfill. I'm choosing the name Michael, so it will be a function similar to the call function. The first argument will be the context or the object, and it could accept any number of arguments depending on how many arguments that print name function is taking. So we'll be using spread operator here. So what we can do is just simply create a random property name. So let's say myfn and assign this to it. So here this points to the print name function. So when I'm writing here this, it means I'm assigning print name function to this myfn property inside this context object. So this myfn is a random name. You can choose any name you want. And all we have to do is just run this function and pass all the arguments that needed to be passed. So similarly, what we did here, we just copy it the whole line, paste it here, and instead of call, we write my call. We save it and go to the browser. We'll see same output. So our my call function is working fine, but it is not a complete solution yet. What if this property myfn already exists inside this context, that is the my name object? So in that case, what would happen? We will be overwriting that property, and we don't want that to happen. So what we have to do, we have to make sure that the name of the property we are choosing is unique and does not exist in this context object already. So let's just remove this and create a variable called current context and assign it to context. So previously I said that the first argument is the this keyword or the context reference to this keyword. But what if someone doesn't pass any argument to this? So in that case, the this inside this print name function will point to the window object. So for if that context is passed while calling the myCall method, then we'll assign the current context, the context property, else we'll assign the global this property, which means the window object. Now we'll create a random value. We'll just call it random prop using the math.random function, and We'll just check if this property, this random property also exists or not inside the myname object. So current context at random prop is not equal to undefined. So we are checking if this property is already exist inside the context object. So what we do, we'll create a new random property using the math.random function again. So what this line of code is doing is just checking that this random prop is unique and already does not exist inside this context object. Now we have make sure that the prop we are using or the property name we are using is unique. We'll just do the same thing. We'll assign this keyword to this random prop. So now after we have assigned this to the random prop property, we'll just execute the function current context at random prop and we'll pass all the arguments. And just in case if the function is returning something, so we'll store the result as well here. Now we'll just delete the random property that we have added to this object or the current context and we'll return the result. So this is the full polyfill for the call method. So let's go through this one more time. What we are doing here is we are checking if we have passed the context or not. If not, we'll assign the global this as the context. Next, we are creating a random property and we are checking if that property already exists inside the context object or not. And if it doesn't exist, once we make sure it doesn't exist, we assign this keyword, that means the print name function, to this random property inside this current context object. We'll run that particular function and pass all the arguments to it. And if in case that function is returning something, we'll store the result as well. After that, we delete that random property and we return the result. Now if we go to the browser and check again, you see we are getting the same result again. Now let's move to apply method. So the only difference between the call and apply method is that the call method takes arguments separately, but apply method takes arguments as a single array. So let's see, instead of passing these arguments as comma separated different values, we'll put them inside a common array and we'll replace call with apply. Now if we save this and run, you see we are getting the same result again. So let's take the polyfill that we wrote for our my call method. So as we discussed, the only difference between call and apply, it instead of taking all values as comma separated, it takes all the arguments in a single array. So the only difference between our my call and my apply polyfill will be that we don't have this spread operator here, because now we are getting a single value, a single array which contains all the extra arguments that needed to be passed to this print name function, or we can call this. So if we save this and instead of my call here write my apply and pass the arguments inside an array. If we save this and go to the browser, we see same result. So these were the polyfill for the apply method. Now let's move to bind method. So the thing with bind function is that instead of running the function then and there, like in case of call, we just write the name of the function and dot call and the print name function will get invoked then and there only. But that is not the case with bind. Instead, with what bind does is when we call the bind function, it will return us another function. Let's store it in a variable result. So when we use the bind method, it will return us a function that we can invoke later on at some point of time. If we invoke it right there, result, go to the browser, we'll see we're getting the same result. And the beauty of bind function is that it's very flexible. That some of the arguments, instead of passing it here, you can also pass those arguments to the result function. And if you save the changes, the result will still be the same. Or let's say the function is accepting one more argument. Let's say anything like street, and printing here. So what we can do, we can pass the street name in as an argument here while invoking the result function. Let's say street xyz. If we save this, we'll get the result here. So our the polyfill will write, or let's say the mybind function should also work in the same way. So similar to call and apply, this function is also available to all functions. So we have to add this as well, the polyfill we are writing as well to the function prototype. Let's call it mybind, and it will take just one rest parameter so that it can accept any number of arguments. And one thing we know for sure about this function, this mybind function, is that it will return us a function that can be used later on. So it will be returning us another function which will also can accept any number of arguments. So one rest parameter here as well. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is get the context. So using this, what we can do, var callback equal to this. Next, what we need is all the arguments that are passed while calling the mybind or while calling the mybind function. So what we can do, we can get this like this: context args dot slice 1. So using slice method, what we are doing, accept the first argument because that is the context. Accept this first argument. What we want all the rest of the arguments that are passed to the bind method. Next, we already have all the arguments that are passed to the result method inside the a rest parameter. Now what we can simply do, we can use the call method on arg0, because argument at 0 here represent the context my name object, and we need to pass all the arguments that are passed to us. That means we need to combine the argument that are passed to the bind method as well as the argument that are passed to the result function. So what we can do it something like this. And the okay. Now if we just write here, let's say const result 2 equal to print name dot mybind, and we pass the object my name object and the parameter. And now if we just copy this line result and paste it here and replace result with the result 2, save it, go to the browser, we'll see we are getting the same result. Okay, so this was the polyfills for call, apply and bind methods. The source code will be available in the description of this video. Thank you for watching.